my end of this, is that the colonial machinery recognized it and called it vampirism and called it witchcraft. Mm-hmm. They're not calling it the delusions of the local populace.
What's that?
What's what?
I don't know the word populace.
People.
The population?
Population, the people in the area.
Why am I asking silly questions?
It's not a silly question. If you don't know, ask. There may be people listening who don't know. It's okay. It's just fine.
Girl, that's what I was born to do. I'm on this podcast for this.
That's right.
And while I agree with you that there definitely could be some strictly local superstition happening.
Right.
But you have to remember that this part of the world takes things very seriously. Like.
Oh, I'm aware. I had family over there just about 25 years later. My grandfather ran an airline over there in Africa for several years, so.
Okay. These same communities are also known to believe in the presence of the jinn. Now,
right.
We've mentioned the jinn on other podcasts, but for the sake of completeness, we'll mention them again. Jinn were said to be the living embodiment of the breath of God.
Okay.
They were creatures of fire, but they could create anything.
Right.
And they kind of got anglicized into these wish-granting creatures, but they were really, really not in any way nice.
Right.
They didn't do things for their own good. And supposedly, according to some versions of the Bible, Solomon had a ring that allowed him, given to him by God himself, that allowed him to control the jinn. It's how he ruled for as long as he did.
I see.
And many of the local populace in these areas believe that ring still exists and is hidden somewhere.
I see.
And a lot of people die going to look for it.
Well, you know, that's what keeps people like your buddy Josh in adventure hats.
It is. It is. But like I said, so we're dealing with a culture that recognizes these things as real. Now, were they real? I don't know. Are puck wedgies real? They've been cited as recently as a few years ago, and not necessarily by Native Americans.
Well, you know.
I think the best thing to do is come back and answer that question later, because there's more information that we have to have.
Okay, then.
But before we get that information, I think we need to pause for a word from our sponsor.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Bring on the sponsors.
So we were talking about the jinn.
You were talking about the jinn. We were listening intently.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to another part of Africa.
Okay.
Let's go to Ethiopia. Although we're going to Ethiopia in the 1930s.
Okay.
And at that point, it was known as Abyssinia. Now, we're going there, we're accompanying Count Byron Kuhn de Prorok. Now, Count is dubious because de Prorok...
But his friends just called him Count BC.
Like I said, the Count is dubious because de Prorok was born in America.
Oh, you know.
And while he is of Hungarian descent, American citizens are not usually allowed to keep such titles.
Well, you know.
So the Count has to be looked at askance, let's say.
Giving him the side eye.
Now, he wrote a book called Dead men do tell tales about a trip he took that took him to Abyssinia in the 1930s. And he was told to go to a cave that these death birds that fed on human blood inhabited this cave.
Okay.
And it was called Devil's Cave.
Well, because that's original.
Well, that and... something's called Devil's Cave, probably a good reason to stay away, unless there's an obvious, like, oh, look, that rock looks like it has horns, like a devil. That must be Devil's Cave. But you don't see that sort of architecture hanging about, stay out. That's all I'm saying. Now, when he was in the cities near where this was supposed to be, he couldn't find anybody who would take him there.
Because they were smart enough to know it was called Devil's Cave.
They were violently afraid of the place. Eventually, he found a goat herd who took him there.
Well,
Oh, darn those goat herds.
Dude.
Well, the goat herds were the only ones who lived near the cave because the people who owned the goats wanted the goats fed near this cave because there's a lot of a lot of grass, which goats like to eat.
Yeah.
And so while de Prorok was there, the thing he noticed is all of these people were gaunt. And the worst of them was, he described a man that looked like bones held together by skin. He was so weak he couldn't get up off of his cot. He was surrounded by blood-soaked rags. Now, they called these things death birds, but they were bats. But supposedly, these bats landed on them and fed on them while they slept so lightly that they never felt it.
Fine.
Yeah.
Now, de Prorok's story, we have to look at kind of askance. One, he's an American who's calling himself a count. A little weird there. Two, archaeologists say he had nothing to do with archaeology. And if he did, he was very bad. They dubbed him a fraud, the archaeologist, and locals dubbed him a grave robber. So, and in fact, a lot of his contemporaries called him a grave robber with ambition.
Well,
So we have to look at that as sort of, I don't know, it's a little... Especially when you add in the fact that Josh Gates went and looked for these very creatures.
And Crush.
Hush face. Went and looked for these very creatures in an episode of Destination Truth. And he never found one. He never found anything that looked like one. But a local professor said he felt like these creatures appeared around the time of elections to scare the populace.
I see.
Yeah.
So he felt like they were being used by the regime to keep the natives in line, keep the locals in line.
Well,
So it's an ancient superstition that's basically being used to defraud the locals of any political voice.
Yep, that you have people... Fear's a good way to keep people in line.
Yeah.
Now, something else about these communities. Sufi scholars have created laws about bloodsucking and the punishments thereof.
Wow. That's impressive. Why would... Well, sure. But just in this day and age, that's probably a good idea to have anyway.
Just saying, they took it seriously enough that they made laws about it.
Okay.
But
one of these days we could since we do true crime, one of these days we could seriously go over all of the laws in the United States that are on the books that make absolutely no sense, that people at some point took seriously enough to make laws about.
All right. Well, let's dig into this a little bit. We're going to go to Southeast Africa, a place called Malawi.
No thanks.
Malawi.
Right. Now, this is 2017 and 2018.
Okay.
Okay. Attacks of similar vampires were reported in Malawi in those years.
Okay.
To the point where people were attacking them and people were killed.
Oh.
Well, that's sad.
So not only are the vampires being reported.
Now deaths from vampires are also being reported? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, deaths from vampires are being reported, but deaths of the vampires as reprisals from the villagers are also being reported. So you have the same kind of thing happening, but you no longer have the slave trade there to support it.
Okay.
Okay then.
Fair enough. But, I mean, at this point now we've got over 100 years worth of, you know, people's lore and questioning and okay, far be it. I don't want to be portraying myself as the person who doesn't believe that there are things that go bump in the night and that science can't explain, because I'm not that person, trust me. You know that. I mean, I don't want everyone else to think that that's who I am, because it seems like every time we get into this conversation, I'm the one going, okay, I hate to be the person to point out the obvious by X, Y, Z. I'm just saying, people get scared of things they don't understand and they make up reasons for it. I 110% believe we have a ghost in the house, but it's not terrifying to me. I think that people a lot of times find something they can't explain and just let it consume them and let it control them. And it kind of feels to me that this is kind of what that is. But I could be totally off my rocker.
I don't know. Who knows?
Now, let's go to Mauritius.
Okay.
We're going to go to Mauritius in spirit. Now,
ooh, Mauritius. All right.
1,200 miles southeast of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's reports recently of a vampire child being seen there.
Mm.
And I found a story about creatures seen hiding among the homeless that would follow their victims, get them alone,
Mm-hmm.
and the victims would be found later anemic and low on blood.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the nation is largely Hindu. So, because I found this on Reddit, I actually was able to contact the Redditor who reported it and ask him about it a little bit. What he says, because the nation is largely Hindu, reports like this get swept under the rug.
I would see.
That while the Hindu believe in vampirism, no place full of Hindus wants to acknowledge that one would exist there. They want to suggest that they are holy enough that such things wouldn't happen.
I gotcha.
It's just like in Africa proper, where we have all this other stuff going on, this is hard to research because Middle Eastern authorities, the Muslims, again, do not want to acknowledge this and certainly don't want to acknowledge it to the West.
Gotcha.
So they tend to bury these kinds of stories.
I see.
So there's that. And then one final note, and this is going to take us away from Africa, but only briefly. We talked in our episode about blood-drinking cryptids, about Comte Estruch, 12th century Catalan vampire. Supposedly, he's still active. A Catalanian man claimed to have seen a man matching the description of the Count, walking along a back road trying to get rides from lone travelers.